The plane cruised high above the clouds, cutting through the crisp morning air with a steady hum. Sarah adjusted her uniform as she walked down the aisle, the soft click of her heels echoing in the quiet cabin. She had been a flight attendant for almost 5 years, and today, like most others, was supposed to be just another routine flight. She smiled politely at passengers as she made her way down the aisle, offering a tray of drinks and snacks. But as she reached row 12, something felt off. The man seated by the window caught her attention. He was tall with messy dark hair, and his sunglasses were still on despite the early morning sun. He looked like the kind of guy who always stood out, effortlessly cool, almost like he belonged in a movie. At first, Sarah didn't think much of it. She had seen plenty of celebrities pass through her cabin before, but the moment she stepped closer, his attitude hit her like a wave. "Excuse me," he snapped, his voice laced with irritation. He lowered his sunglasses just enough to reveal his dark, intense eyes. "Can you get me something better than this?" He gestured rudely at the tiny bottle of water she'd just handed him. Sarah blinked, her smile stiffening. "Sir, that's the standard offering for this flight," he scoffed. "Standard? I don't pay for standard. I expect better service." She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. It wasn't the first time a passenger had been difficult, but something about this guy rubbed her the wrong way. "I'm sorry, sir, but that's all we offer on this flight. If you'd like something else, we have a full menu with options available for purchase." His lips curled into a mocking smile. "You know, I don't think you understand who I am." There it was. The line she hated hearing more than anything. She had dealt with entitled passengers before, and every time it made her blood boil. She could already feel the frustration building inside her. Without thinking, Sarah responded sharply, "And I don't care who you are. You're a passenger just like everyone else. If you want something extra, you'll have to pay for it." His eyebrows shot up, and for a moment, there was a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. He leaned forward, his voice lowering to a menacing calm. "I don't think you realize how big of a mistake you just made." The words cut through the air, but it wasn't just his tone. It was the pure arrogance in them. Before Sarah could take a step back, the frustration inside her reached a boiling point. In one swift motion, she slapped him across the face. The sound of the slap rang out across the cabin, and the entire plane seemed to freeze. Sarah stood there, heart pounding in her chest, her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe she'd just done that. Her stomach twisted in panic, and she glanced around, realizing that everyone was watching. The man was stunned, his hand slowly moving to his cheek, where the red mark was already forming. His eyes met hers, wide with surprise. For a moment, no one moved. Sarah's face burned with embarrassment. What had she just done? She had slapped a passenger, a man who had been rude, sure, but was it really worth it? Her mind raced with thoughts of losing her job, of all the ways this could go horribly wrong. And yet, part of her couldn't shake the feeling of a strange kind of relief. He blinked a few times, still staring at her, then finally spoke in a calm, controlled voice. "You've got guts, I'll give you that." Sarah didn't know what to say. She just stood there, heart racing, unsure of what came next. She was about to apologize when he stood up. "Don't worry," he said, his voice far too composed for someone who had just been slapped in public. "I'll make sure your little outburst isn't overlooked." It was then that Sarah realized the man wasn't just any passenger. The sunglasses, the sharp suit, he wasn't just a celebrity. This man in front of her was Keanu Reeves. Her breath caught in her throat. She had just slapped Keanu Reeves. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The hours that followed felt like an eternity. Sarah's mind raced with a constant replay of the moment she slapped Keanu Reeves. She could hardly focus on her duties for the rest of the flight. Every time she glanced down the aisle, she could feel the eyes of passengers on her, even though most were pretending not to notice. Her heart was still pounding, and her stomach twisted into tight knots. What was she thinking? She had just assaulted a man who could ruin her career in an instant, someone whose face was known all over the world. Once the flight landed, Sarah was immediately escorted off the plane. Her colleagues' faces were a mix of confusion and concern. They didn't know exactly what had happened, but they knew something big had gone down. The whispers spread quickly. As she was ushered into the back office of the airport, she sank into a chair, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. What now? The silence in the room seemed to stretch on forever. It wasn't long before a senior manager came in, followed by another figure, Keanu Reeves himself. The shock of seeing him in person was one thing, but the reality of what had just happened was overwhelming. Sarah couldn't meet his gaze. He was dressed casually now, wearing a black hoodie and jeans, but he still exuded an aura of authority and grace that made her feel small. He didn't look angry, he just looked disappointed. "Sarah," the manager started, "this is Mr. Reeves. He's here to discuss the incident." Sarah swallowed hard, unsure of what to expect. She could barely bring herself to look at Keanu. His calm demeanor only made her feel more guilty. The tension was palpable. Keanu cleared his throat, his voice smooth yet firm. "I'm not here to make this worse for you," he said, his words surprising her. "I just want to understand why you did it." She was taken aback. Was he seriously asking her why she slapped him? I'm sorry, Mr. Reeves, I was out of line," Sarah stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I couldn't take it anymore. You were being rude, and I snapped. I never should have done that." Keanu looked at her, his eyes softening. He paused for a long moment, studying her. "I get it," he said quietly. "I've been on the receiving end of bad service too. But slapping me, that's a bit extreme." She could feel her face burning with embarrassment. "I know, it was impulsive. I've never done anything like that before. I'm not usually like that, I swear. It's just, I've been dealing with a lot of stuff lately, and I let it get to me. It's no excuse, but you're under a lot of stress," he interrupted gently. "I can see that, and I know what it feels like to be under pressure, to have the whole world expect something from you." He leaned back slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "But you've got to handle things differently. You can't let your emotions control you like that." She nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "I know. I really messed up." Keanu's expression softened even more. "I'm not here to get you fired, Sarah. But you have to understand that actions have consequences. People are going to talk about this, and it might cost you more than just your job here." The weight of his words hit her hard. She had no idea what kind of fallout she was about to face. Would the media find out? Would her family and friends hear about it? And what about the people at the airline? She didn't want to lose everything. But as she looked into Keanu's eyes, something about his calmness made her feel like there was more to him than just a famous actor. She expected him to be angry, to lash out, but he was so composed, so understanding, and that confused her even more. "I won't press charges," Keanu said finally, breaking the silence. "But I'm going to need you to sit tight for a while. We'll be reviewing the situation with the airline's management. I suggest you use this time to reflect on what happened." Sarah couldn't believe it. He wasn't going to press charges. After what she did to him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'll make it right, I promise." Keanu nodded, his gaze softening. "We all make mistakes, Sarah. It's how we handle them that counts." With that, he turned and left the room, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. Sarah sat there for a moment longer, the gravity of the situation sinking in. She wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or even more anxious than before. As she was escorted out of the room by the senior manager, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of her story with Keanu. There was more to this than just a simple slap. And for some reason, she couldn't help but feel like this bizarre encounter was only the beginning of something that would change her life forever. The next few days felt like a blur to Sarah. She stayed at home, avoiding her phone and the constant buzz of messages. Her friends had heard about the slap, thanks to the gossip mill, and the news had spread like wildfire. She couldn't even escape the stories on the internet. The incident was everywhere, from social media posts to tabloid headlines. Some people thought it was hilarious, others criticized her for being unprofessional. But what really gnawed at her was that Keanu had given her a second chance. He could have ruined her, but he didn't. He hadn't pressed charges, but that didn't mean everything was forgiven. The call came on Thursday afternoon. The airline wanted to speak with her in person, and it sounded important. Sarah felt a lump in her throat as she read the message. She had a feeling this was it, the moment her career, and possibly her life, would change forever. She arrived at the airline's headquarters and was immediately escorted to a sleek, modern office. The interior was all polished wood and steel, with giant windows offering a panoramic view of the city. It looked like a place where decisions about people's lives were made on a daily basis. The contrast between the sleek, impersonal office and her nervous, disheveled state made Sarah feel smaller than ever. She was led into a meeting room where she found Keanu sitting at a long, polished conference table, his fingers loosely clasped together. He was dressed casually in a navy blue sweater and jeans, looking every bit the celebrity, but with an air of quiet authority. "Sarah," he greeted her, his voice calm, but with a weight of expectation in it. "Please, have a seat." She hesitated, then sank into the chair across from him, trying her best to keep her hands from shaking. The silence stretched on for a moment, the tension almost palpable. Keanu studied her for a moment before speaking. "I wanted to meet with you in person, not because I have to, but because I think it's important that we have this conversation face to face. What you did was out of line. You know that. But I also know there's more to the story than just a slap." Sarah bit her lip, trying to control the emotions that threatened to break free. "I am really sorry," she said quietly. "I lost control. That's not who I am. I don't know what happened. I was just so frustrated, and it was like everything just boiled over in that moment. You didn't deserve it." Keanu nodded, his expression unreadable. "I can see that. But you have to understand, Sarah, that the situation wasn't just about what you did to me. It's about how people react under pressure. We all have our breaking points, but you have to know how to deal with that. I'm not here to criticize you for the mistake you made. What I'm interested in is what comes next." Sarah stared at him, confusion written all over her face. "What do you mean, what comes next?" I thought I was going to lose my job, maybe even face charges." Her voice wavered as she spoke, uncertainty and guilt still clinging to every word. Keanu smiled, faintly. "You've been through enough already. I think you deserve a chance to prove yourself, but I can't promise you that things will go back to normal. You've got to show me that you've learned from this and that you can handle the pressure." Sarah felt a spark of hope flicker inside her. "You're giving me a chance." "I'm not just giving you a chance, Sarah," Keanu said, his tone serious. "I'm giving you an opportunity to change, to grow. I can help you, but it's going to take a lot of work. You'll need to prove to me and to yourself that you can move past this, that you can be better than what you've shown so far. It's not just about getting your job back. It's about learning how to navigate the pressure that comes with this line of work and the responsibility that comes with representing an airline." She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. The weight of what he was saying was immense, but there was something about his calm demeanor that made her believe he was sincere. He wasn't just another angry rich guy looking to make her pay for her mistake. He was offering her something more. "Where do I even begin?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his hands now resting on the table. "We're going to start by working together. You'll come with me on a few business trips, see what it's really like behind the scenes of this airline. You'll meet with the people who help keep it running, and I want you to listen. I want you to hear their stories and understand what they go through. You're going to learn, Sarah. I'm not here to babysit you, but I am going to make sure you're given the tools you need to succeed." The idea of spending time with him, working alongside him, made her feel a mix of excitement and anxiety. This wasn't just a chance to save her job. This was an opportunity to completely change her life, to see things from a different perspective. "Don't know what to say," she said, still in disbelief. "But I'll do it. I'll do whatever it takes. I won't mess this up." Keanu's gaze softened. "I know you won't. But remember, this isn't about me. This is about you proving to yourself that you can rise above this, that you're capable of handling whatever comes your way, even when it's hard." She nodded, feeling a sense of clarity that had been missing for weeks. She was no longer just the flight attendant who slapped a celebrity. She was a person who had a chance to redeem herself and change the direction of her life. As she stood to leave the meeting, Keanu added, "One last thing. If you ever need advice, or if you just need someone to talk to about the pressure, don't hesitate to reach out. I've been where you are, and I get it." Sarah looked at him, a quiet sense of gratitude rising in her chest. For the first time in days, she felt like things might actually turn out okay. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah spent her time brushing up on flight protocols, reading up on airline operations, and trying to mentally prepare herself for the reality of what was coming. Keanu's words kept running through her mind. "This is about you proving to yourself that you can rise above this." The company arranged everything. A flight was booked, a hotel room reserved, and before she knew it, Sarah was standing at the airport, boarding a private jet with Keanu. It was surreal. She still couldn't believe that just a few days ago she had slapped the man sitting across from her. Now here she was on his plane, with the chance to turn her life around. As she settled into her seat, she tried to act normal, though every inch of her body felt like a bundle of nerves. She had to remind herself to breathe. Keanu sat across from her, looking calm as ever, flipping through a file. He glanced up at her, his usual calm demeanor giving her a sense of comfort. "First stop is a quick meeting with the logistics team in Denver," he said, his voice steady and businesslike. "We'll be there for about 2 hours, and then we'll head to the next city. During these trips, you'll be observing, not participating. Just pay attention and ask questions when you can. The goal is to see how everything works from the ground up." Sarah nodded, her mind racing with the possibility of everything she could learn. She had always been good at her job, but this was something entirely different. She was stepping into a new world, one that was much larger and more complex than she had ever imagined. The flight was smooth, and Keanu's presence, while powerful, was surprisingly comforting. He didn't speak much during the flight, focusing on his work, but he did give her a few small pieces of advice here and there. At one point, when Sarah asked a question about the airline's financials, Keanu paused, then answered her thoughtfully. "The numbers aren't just about profit," he explained. "They're about creating an experience for people. We're in the business of connection. Every person that steps onto this plane, whether they're flying first class or economy, has a story. And our job is to make that experience a little bit better, no matter their situation." Sarah absorbed his words carefully. She had always thought of her job as simply serving drinks and helping passengers, but now she was starting to see the bigger picture. She wasn't just working on a plane, she was part of something far more intricate and important. When they landed in Denver, Sarah felt a surge of nervous energy. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew this was her chance. She followed Keanu through the private terminal, her mind still processing everything he had said. The logistics team greeted them with efficiency and respect, and Sarah couldn't help but notice how different the atmosphere was compared to her usual flights. It wasn't just business. It was a different level of professionalism and attention to detail. She stayed quiet at first, observing how Keanu interacted with the team. His leadership was firm but fair, and he asked insightful questions that made everyone think a little harder about the answers they were giving. He wasn't there to tell people what to do. He was there to understand their challenges and offer solutions. Sarah took mental notes, realizing that this wasn't just about being good at a job. It was about being a leader, someone who understood every aspect of what was going on around them. After the meeting, Keanu led her to the conference room, where a small group of employees was gathered for a debrief. Keanu made introductions, then turned to her. "Sarah, I want you to sit in on this meeting," he said. "Ask questions, see how we run things behind the scenes. It's important to understand how the people who make this company work feel about their jobs and the company itself." She nodded, sitting quietly in the corner, her mind working overtime to process everything she was hearing. The employees spoke about the challenges of running a global airline, logistical issues, customer complaints, safety protocols. But it wasn't just the work that intrigued Sarah. It was the sense of unity and commitment they shared. They were all working toward the same goal, and it showed. At the end of the meeting, Sarah felt her confidence grow a little bit. She wasn't just a flight attendant. She was part of something larger, something that had an impact on thousands of lives every day. She could make a difference too, She just had to understand the whole system and how she fit into it. Back on the plane, Keanu glanced at her, as if assessing her reaction. "So, what did you think?" he asked. "I didn't realize how much went into it all," Sarah admitted, still processing the experience. "I always thought it was just about serving drinks and making sure passengers were comfortable, but there's so much more." Keanu smiled slightly. "Exactly. The people who work behind the scenes are the backbone of this entire operation. If you understand that, you'll be a much better flight attendant. You'll see passengers not as customers but as people, and that's a huge difference." She absorbed his words quietly, her mind buzzing with new insights. This was more than a job. It was a mission. And for the first time in weeks, she felt like she could do it. The days that followed were a whirlwind of city stops, early mornings and late nights. Denver was only the beginning. Sarah traveled with Keanu to several more cities, each one revealing a different layer of the airline's inner workings. From meetings with the maintenance crew in Chicago to sitting in on training sessions for new flight attendants in Miami, Sarah was slowly being immersed in a world far beyond what she had ever known. Keanu's approach was gentle but direct, always, encouraging her to ask questions, observe and dig deeper. Each night after the long days of meetings and tours, they would sit together in the private jet or in hotel lobbies, discussing what they had learned. Sarah had never expected that. She would bond with him on such a personal level. It started with small conversations about their backgrounds. Keanu, in his usual understated manner, had shared a little about his childhood, his passion for film and the challenges of being in the public eye. Sarah, in turn, opened up about her own struggles, growing up in a small town, feeling lost, in a big city, and the pressure she had always felt to prove herself. Despite the differences in their lives, they discovered they both shared a common thread, the feeling of being misunderstood, of having expectations placed upon them by others, and the constant search for a sense of belonging. One evening, as they sat in a quiet corner of a hotel bar in New York, Keanu looked at Sarah with a thoughtful expression. "You've come a long way in just a few days, Sarah," he said, sipping his drink. "I can see the change in you. You're not just here for the job anymore. You're here because you want to be part of something bigger." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and surprise. She had never expected to feel this way. She had started this journey in a state of confusion, guilt and anxiety, but now she felt something different. Purpose. "I never realized how much I was missing," she said, her voice soft but full of emotion. "I used to think it was enough, just to do my job. But now I see, I can't just go through the motions. I want to really make a difference. I want to understand people, not just serve them." Keanu nodded, his eyes warm. "That's the first step, and it's a big one. But don't expect it to be easy. This kind of change isn't something that happens overnight. You'll have to fight for it every day. But if you stick with it, you'll get there." Sarah felt a surge of determination. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was on the right path. It wasn't about erasing the past or forgetting the mistakes she'd made. It was about building something new, from the ground up. The conversation turned to lighter topics as the evening wore on. They laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed each other's company in a way that felt completely natural. Sarah couldn't believe how far she had come. A few weeks ago, she would have never imagined she'd be sitting here with Keanu Reeves, sharing a drink and talking about life. But something was shifting between them. They were no longer just a celebrity and an employee. There was a growing respect, a quiet camaraderie that made Sarah feel like she was no longer alone in the world. Keanu had become more than just a mentor. He was someone she could rely on, someone who understood her struggles and challenges. As the night ended, they both made their way back to their separate rooms. But before they parted ways, Keanu stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Remember what we talked about?" He said, "This isn't just about impressing me. It's about impressing yourself. Don't forget that." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I won't forget." It had been 2 weeks since Sarah started traveling with Keanu. The once overwhelming task of redeeming herself now felt like a challenge she was ready to face head-on. The lessons she had learned were starting to sink in, and she could feel herself changing. But there was still so much to do, so much to prove to herself and to those around her. The next destination on their itinerary was Los Angeles, where the company was holding an exclusive press event to announce a new partnership. Sarah was tasked with overseeing the flight's VIP passengers, something she had done countless times in the past, but this time it felt different. There were no second chances. She couldn't afford to mess up. Keanu was already in his element, moving seamlessly between meetings and interviews, his presence commanding the attention of everyone around him. It was clear to Sarah that he was a master at managing high-pressure situations. But it was also clear that Keanu expected the same professionalism from her. And in this environment, every mistake, no matter how small, could have consequences. As the plane soared toward Los Angeles, Sarah's mind raced. She knew the passengers were expecting top-tier service, and she had no intention of disappointing them. She also knew that this was her moment to prove not just to Keanu, but to herself that she was capable of handling the responsibility that came with the job. The cabin was buzzing with energy as the flight attendants prepared for the passengers' arrival. Sarah moved quickly, organizing the seating arrangements, checking the catering orders, and ensuring that every detail was perfect. She could hear the hum of excitement as they neared their destination. But with the excitement came an undercurrent of tension. This was the kind of flight where things could easily go wrong. The stakes felt higher than ever. It wasn't long before Sarah found herself standing outside the private jet's entrance, greeting the VIPs who would be boarding. Among them was a familiar face, an actress Sarah had admired for years, someone she had always seen in the tabloids and on the red carpet. She knew she had to be on her best behavior, but the nerves were unavoidable. "Hi, Ms. Allen," Sarah greeted her, trying to keep her voice steady. "Welcome aboard." The actress smiled warmly, making small talk as she stepped onto the plane. Sarah led her to her seat, keeping her focus, despite the flurry of activity around her. But as the last few passengers boarded, Sarah felt a strange sensation, an overwhelming sense of unease. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When the flight finally took off, Sarah settled into her role, managing the passengers and ensuring their needs were met. Keanu had disappeared into the back of the plane, presumably to prepare for the press event. It was then that Sarah noticed one of the passengers, a well-dressed man sitting near the front, seemed unusually agitated. He kept glancing around the cabin, muttering to himself, his eyes flicking nervously between the flight attendants. Sarah approached him cautiously, trying to mask the anxiety that was creeping up on her. "Excuse me, sir," she said gently, her voice soft but professional. "Is everything okay? Can I get you anything?" The man's gaze flicked toward her, his face flushed with frustration. "I can't find my laptop," he said, in a low, clipped tone. "I had it on my seat and now it's gone. Did someone take it?" Sarah's stomach dropped. She had no idea where the laptop could have gone, but she could sense the tension rising. The man's accusation was serious. If the laptop had been taken, it could lead to an uncomfortable situation. "Let me check for you, sir," Sarah said, trying to stay calm. "I'll make sure we find it." As she began to check the area around the seat, she noticed something strange. There was a small folded piece of paper tucked under the armrest. Her heart skipped a beat as she unfolded it, reading the message in shaky handwriting. "Don't forget, I'm watching. Keep the passengers happy or you won't be flying high for much longer." It took Sarah a moment to process the words. The message wasn't signed, but the threat was clear. She looked around the cabin nervously, but everything seemed normal. Could someone have slipped this note to her while she wasn't paying attention? And who could possibly be watching her so closely? A cold sweat formed on the back of her neck as she considered the implications. This was far beyond just a missing laptop. Someone was trying to intimidate her, perhaps sabotage her efforts. But why? Before she could contemplate further, the man, who had lost his laptop, stood up abruptly, demanding that the flight attendants search the entire plane for it. His voice was rising, attracting attention. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. The last thing she needed was a public scene, especially with Keanu in the back of the plane, preparing for an important event. "I'll take care of this, sir," Sarah said, trying to de-escalate the situation. "Let me search the area thoroughly. I'll make sure we find it." Keanu appeared suddenly, stepping out of the rear cabin. His sharp eyes immediately took in the tense situation. Without missing a beat, he walked over to Sarah and the irate passenger. "What seems to be the problem?" Keanu asked in his usual calm, collected tone. The man turned toward Keanu, clearly starstruck but still agitated. "I lost my laptop. I'm not leaving this plane until it's found. Someone must have taken it." Keanu nodded slowly, taking control of the situation with an air of authority. "We'll take care of it. I suggest you sit down and let my staff handle this." With just a few words, Keanu diffused the situation. The man reluctantly agreed to sit back down, though he was still muttering under his breath. Keanu's presence alone had brought an immediate sense of calm, but Sarah knew this was just the beginning. As the flight continued on, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. Someone was trying to disrupt her, maybe even ruin her second chance. The tension in her chest was a constant reminder that this wasn't just about doing her job anymore. She was fighting for her career, her future, and now it seemed like someone was trying to take that away from her. The next few hours felt like a blur. After the incident with the missing laptop, Sarah couldn't shake the unease that clung to her like a shadow. She had tried to focus on the flight's final leg, making sure the passengers were comfortable and the service was smooth, but her mind kept drifting back to that note. "I'm watching. Keep the passengers happy, or you won't be flying high for much longer." Who would send such a message, and why? She was just a flight attendant. Why would anyone target her? The fact that Keanu had intervened so effortlessly reassured her for the moment, but she knew that nothing would be resolved until she figured out who was behind the threat. As the plane descended into Los Angeles, Sarah felt her heart race. The press event was about to begin, and she was about to step into the world of high society, where her every move would be scrutinized. Keanu's calm, collected presence had steadied her before, but now she felt a surge of anxiety. The stakes had just been raised higher. When the plane finally landed, Sarah quickly gathered her thoughts, putting the mystery of the note on the back burner for the moment. The press event was too important to let her fears derail her now. The terminal was filled with flashing cameras and the low hum of excited chatter as they disembarked. Keanu was immediately surrounded by the media, answering questions and making small talk with important figures. Meanwhile, Sarah focused on her role, assisting the VIP passengers as they were escorted to the event area. But even as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. It was a creeping sensation, an unsettling chill that made her glance over her shoulder more than once. The day's events were moving quickly, but Sarah's thoughts were stuck on that note, wondering if she was being set up for something worse. The event itself was everything she had imagined, a lavish affair with glossy magazine editors, top-tier business moguls and influencers who could make or break a company. Sarah was on edge, not just because of the tension she felt in the air, but because she was constantly reminded of her role in it all. She was an outsider in this world, trying to fit in and prove her worth, but the weight of the note and the mystery behind it was starting to feel like a heavy cloak on her shoulders. She caught sight of Keanu in the crowd, his presence commanding attention, but his eyes caught hers across the room and he gave her a small nod of reassurance. It was the kind of gesture that meant everything in a world where things often felt too big and out of control. But just as Sarah began to feel like she could finally relax, she noticed something strange. The man who had lost his laptop earlier, the ITR, one who had caused the scene on the plane, was standing at the back of the room staring at her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. His eyes were not filled with anger or frustration anymore, but something else, something almost predatory. Her heart skipped a beat, and her mind immediately went back to that note. What if he had been behind it all? What if he was the one watching her? She glanced around the room nervously, trying to avoid his gaze, but the feeling of being cornered only intensified. Sarah excused herself from the group she was speaking with and made her way toward the back of the venue, hoping to collect her thoughts in private. As she turned down a hallway that led to the restrooms, she nearly bumped into someone. She looked up to find herself face to face with Keanu, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" he asked, his voice calm but with an edge of concern. Sarah swallowed hard, still shaken. I don't know. I feel like I'm being watched, Keanu. There's something about this guy, the one who lost his laptop on the plane. I don't trust him." Keanu's brow furrowed slightly. He looked over his shoulder, scanning the crowd behind them. "I noticed him too. He seems off." "I don't think he's just upset about the laptop," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "I think he's been behind the whole thing. The note, everything. He's been targeting me." Keanu nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Let's not jump to conclusions, Sarah. But you're right to be cautious. I'll look into it, but for now keep your distance from him." Sarah nodded, but the weight of the situation was starting to get to her. Every step she took now felt like a balancing act, trying to maintain her professionalism while wrestling with the paranoia that had crept into her every thought. She couldn't afford to let herself break down. Not here. Not now. "I appreciate you looking out for me," Sarah said quietly. "But what if this is bigger than just one person?" Keanu looked at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with an unspoken understanding. "We'll figure this out. You've got a team behind you, even if you don't realize it yet." Sarah felt a small sense of relief at his words. He was right. She wasn't alone in this. She had come this far, had already faced worse, so why let this mysterious threat break her now? Just then, the noise from the press event echoed through the hallway, and Sarah realized it was time to get back into the thick of it. She straightened her back, took a deep breath, and nodded at Keanu. "All right, let's get back to work, Azia." They walked back to the venue. Sarah could feel her confidence returning bit by bit, but she couldn't forget the unease still swirling inside her. Whoever was trying to sabotage her would stop at nothing to get their way, but Sarah was no longer the person who would just let things happen. She was going to fight for her place in this world, no matter who or what was standing in her way. The following morning, after the press event had ended, Sarah found herself alone in a hotel room, staring at the ocean view through the window. She had been up all night, tossing and turning in bed, wrestling with the questions that plagued her. Who was behind the note? What were their intentions? And why had they targeted her? Keanu had kept his word. He'd discreetly looked into the situation, but hadn't shared any conclusions yet. The feeling of unease, however, hadn't subsided. Sarah knew the mystery had to be solved before it spiraled out of control, but no matter how hard she thought, nothing made sense. The phone on the nightstand buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. Keanu's name. She picked it up quickly. "Hey, Sarah, got a minute?" he asked, his voice steady but serious. "Of course, what's going on?" "I need you to meet me downstairs in the hotel lobby. I have some things to discuss with you." His tone wasn't what Sarah expected. It wasn't the usual friendly tone, nor the casual mentor-like reassurance. There was something urgent in it, something that made her stomach churn with anticipation. "I'll be down in 10 minutes, she hung up, quickly preparing herself for whatever Keanu had found out. She couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to take a sharp turn. When Sarah entered the lobby, she saw Keanu standing by the coffee bar, looking out the window with a tense expression. He was alone. As she approached, he turned and gave her a small nod, motioning for her to sit across from him. "Keanu." "What's going on?" Sarah asked, unable to keep the nerves from her voice. He looked at her for a moment, as if considering his words carefully. "Sarah, I've looked into this situation. You were right to feel suspicious. The man who caused the scene at the press event last night, his name is Daniel Carter. He's a corporate spy." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Corporate spy, she was floored. "What? What do you mean? How could he be a corporate spy?" Keanu leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "He's been working with a competitor to gather inside information from companies like ours, and I've just learned that he's been keeping an eye on you specifically. It seems he's been using you as a way to get close to the airline's operations, to learn our weaknesses." Sarah could hardly believe it. A corporate spy? She had assumed it was just some disgruntled passenger, maybe someone with a personal vendetta. But a professional? This was beyond anything she had imagined. I didn't think it was that serious. I just thought he was some angry customer or something." He's been targeting me on purpose? Keanu nodded. Exactly, and he's not the only one. There's a bigger picture here. You've unwittingly become part of something much larger than a petty grudge. Sarah felt a wave of nausea rise in her stomach. The realization that she had been unknowingly entangled in a corporate espionage scheme was overwhelming. What should I do? What happens now? We'll handle it, Keanu said firmly. We've already informed the proper authorities and we're taking measures to protect the company's interests. But I need you to stay focused. We can't let this distract you. We've come too far for you to back down now. The weight of his words hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. She had come this far, hadn't she? She couldn't let fear or paranoia ruin everything she had worked for. But the thought that she had been part of something dangerous made her feel vulnerable. Exposed, Keanu seemed to sense her inner turmoil. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're stronger than you think, Sarah. You've got this. But you need to stay alert, stay sharp. Sarah nodded, a sense of resolve slowly creeping in. She couldn't afford to back down, not now. The stakes were higher than ever, and she was more determined than ever to protect everything she had worked so hard to achieve. All right, I'll do whatever it takes, she said, her voice steady. But what happens to Daniel? Is he going to be arrested or something? Keanu shook his head slightly. Not yet. Right now, we're gathering enough evidence to make sure we can prove what he's been doing. But in the meantime, you need to stay away from him. Don't engage with him. Just keep doing your job and let us handle the rest. Sarah took a deep breath. Okay, I can do that. Keanu's expression softened, and for the first time in days, Sarah felt like she was not alone in this fight. He wasn't just her boss anymore. He had become a protector of sorts, someone who had her back even when the odds were stacked against her. With the conversation concluded, Sarah took a moment to digest everything that had happened. She had learned more than she'd ever expected in such a short period. What started as a simple mistake had snowballed into a complex and dangerous situation, but she knew one thing for sure now. She couldn't back down. Later that afternoon, Keanu and Sarah flew out to their next destination, San Francisco, where Sarah would be working another VIP flight. But as the days went on, Sarah noticed something unsettling. Despite Keanu's assurances, Daniel Carter's presence seemed to linger in the background. She still felt his watchful gaze, whether it was in the crowded hotel lobby or during the private event they attended that evening. But this time, Sarah wasn't going to let fear control her. She wasn't the same woman who had stumbled into the world of high society just weeks ago. She had learned how to stand tall, how to take control of her fate. She would no longer be a pawn in anyone's game. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. After everything Sarah had uncovered, she couldn't shake the weight of it all. She had learned that Daniel Carter was just a pawn in a much larger scheme, but he wasn't the only one pulling strings. The deeper Sarah dug, the more she realized. She was in the middle of something far more dangerous and complex than she had ever imagined. Keanu had kept a close watch on her, guiding her through the remaining flights and press events. They were scheduled to attend an important business gala in New York, a high-profile event where the stakes were higher than ever. And Sarah knew it wasn't just another networking opportunity. It was the culmination of everything that had been happening. She could feel it in the air. She had made peace with the fact that this journey wasn't just about her career anymore. She wasn't just a flight attendant. She was in the middle of a battle, one that would shape her future. But the question was, how far would she have to go to win? The day of the gala arrived, and Sarah could feel the tension in the air. As she stepped into the lavish ballroom in New York, the world of the rich and powerful seemed to swirl around her. The champagne flowed, the music played, and the air buzzed with conversations about deals, partnerships, and fortunes. But Sarah's focus wasn't on the glittering attendees or the luxury of the event. It was on the threat that had been lurking in the shadows. Keanu had tasked her with ensuring that all VIP guests were seated properly and that the event went off without a hitch. She had done it 100 times before, but today it felt different. She was constantly aware of the potential danger, every face in the crowd now suspect. Was Daniel here? Was there someone else pulling strings? It wasn't long before Sarah spotted him. Daniel Carter. He was standing near the back of the room, talking to an unfamiliar man in a dark suit. The two were deep in conversation, their heads bent low. Sarah couldn't help but feel a surge of suspicion. What were they talking about? Were they plotting something? She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. This was it. This was the moment she had been dreading. She needed to get to the bottom of this, to stop the plot before it unraveled further. As the evening wore on, Sarah kept a careful eye on Daniel and his companion, all while juggling her duties. But when the final speech of the night began, something unexpected happened. The confrontation, Keanu appeared at her side, his expression serious. "Sarah, I think we need to talk. Now." Without hesitation, Sarah followed him to a quieter corner of the ballroom. Keanu's eyes were sharp, scanning the crowd, his posture tense. "What's going on?" Sarah asked. Keanu looked at her gravely. "Daniel Carter is a bigger threat than we thought. He's been working with someone inside the company, someone we trust." Sarah's heart dropped. "Who?" Keanu hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing his next words carefully. "It's our VP of Operations, Jack Clayton. He's been leaking company secrets to the competitor. And he's been using Carter to get to you. You were never just a target. You were bait." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Bait. She had been the pawn in a much larger game all along. But the realization didn't paralyze her. It fueled her determination. She wasn't going to let Jack Clayton or anyone else use her. "So what do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice steady. Keanu took a deep breath. "We confront him. But it's not going to be easy. Jack is dangerous, and he has influence. If we do this, we have to make sure we have all the evidence we need." They turned to leave the corner, but before they could make their way through the crowd, Sarah's eyes caught something across the room, Jack Clayton, standing in conversation with Daniel Carter. Sarah's instincts flared, her heart pounding. This was it. The moment had come. Keanu's gaze followed hers, and he nodded. "We need to move now." The final showdown with Keanu leading the way, they made their way through the crowd, careful not to draw attention. Sarah's mind raced as they approached the two men. The moment was surreal. Everything she had worked for, everything she had feared was converging on this one critical moment. Jack and Daniel were deep in conversation when Keanu stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. "Jack, Daniel, we need to talk." The two men turned, their expressions shifting from calm to guarded, but it was Jack who spoke first, a thin smile playing at his lips. "Keanu, I didn't expect you to show up. How convenient." Keanu didn't flinch. "Don't play games, Jack. We know what you've been up to. We have the evidence." Jack's smile faltered for a split second, but he quickly regained composure. "Evidence? You're mistaken. There's nothing to discuss here." "Don't lie, Jack," Sarah interjected, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "We know about the leaks. We know you've been using Daniel to target me, to use me as a pawn to get what you want." For a moment, Jack's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. But then, to Sarah's surprise, he chuckled softly. "You have no idea how much you've been played, do you? You think this is about some petty corporate espionage? You think you've won?" Keanu stepped forward, his tone unwavering. "It's over, Jack. We have everything we need to take you down." The tension in the air was thick. It was a standoff, the kind of confrontation that felt as though it could erupt at any moment. Sarah's eyes flickered between Keanu and Jack, trying to assess the situation. She knew they couldn't back down now. Just then, a security guard appeared seemingly out of nowhere, stepping up behind Jack. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized what was happening. Jack had been ready for this. He wasn't just a corporate spy. He was an expert manipulator, and he'd planned his escape from the beginning. But this time, Sarah wasn't going to be fooled. Before anyone could react, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small device, a recorder she'd secretly hidden earlier. With a swift motion, she pressed the play button, and the sound of Jack's voice came through loud and clear, admitting everything. "I've been feeding them information for months. You think Keanu's going to stop me? You don't even know. Who's really pulling the strings?" The room fell silent. Jack's face drained of color as the damning words echoed in the air. The guard stiffened, his hand hovering near his radio as he processed the scene. It was over. Epilogue. The new beginning. In the aftermath of the gala, everything came crashing down. Jack Clayton was arrested, and Daniel Carter was quickly taken into custody. The company's future was secured, but more importantly, Sarah had proven herself, both to the world and to herself. As she stood beside Keanu in the airport the following day, waiting for her next flight, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had gone from an uncertain flight attendant to a woman who had faced down a conspiracy and come out victorious. "So you did it, Sarah," Keanu said with a rare smile. "You held your own." She smiled back, the weight of the past few weeks lifting off her shoulders. "I couldn't have done it without you." Keanu's expression softened. "You didn't need me to do it. You just needed to believe in yourself." As they walked toward the gate, Sarah's heart felt lighter. The journey wasn't over, but she was ready for whatever came next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. What's the most unexpected challenge you've overcome, and how did it change you?